Hey everybody, I thought I'd make a short video dealing with how to graph using Google Sheets. I may have done something similar to this before, but I thought I'd cover a couple things that people were having trouble with. So in this one, I'm going to go ahead and take two different columns over here and use them as force and velocity. And so it is a good idea to label your columns. It's not a requirement, but it's a good idea to do so. So I'm going to label this column force and this column velocity. An important thing to note is that when you start putting numbers down in here, you can actually tell whether or not Google Sheets can use those numbers to do calculations or graphs depending on how it's formatted. For instance, if I come in here and I plug in a 10 and I hit enter, it's going to format it to the right. And if it formats it to the right, it means that it is a number and it can be graphed, it can be used to do calculations. But on the flip side of things, if I take this number instead and I put a unit in with it as well, so I put 10N for 10 newtons, and then I hit enter, you'll notice that it formats it to the left instead. That indicates to Google Sheets and to the user of Google Sheets that that's actually like a word. And so it's not a number. It doesn't treat it as a number. I can't add with it, I can't subtract with it, and I can't graph with it. So the best choice here is to go ahead and put units up in the top of the columns, and usually I put it in parentheses to be able to indicate that this is force in newtons, or velocity, for instance, in meters per second. And then we're doing pretty well. Underneath that, I'm going to plug in some fake data, some data that's not connected to anything. But the numbers I'm going to use here are 0, 1, let's use 4, 9, 16, 5. Maybe you can see a pattern there, because why not? And then the numbers for velocity, I'll put in some numbers here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So I've got some numbers that I want to graph, and if I'm doing this, I'm going to go ahead and this time around, instead of highlighting ahead of time, I could highlight from the force all the way down to the number 5 here and then hit insert graph, and I've done that before in other videos, but I'm going to take it through the process of just inputting straight from the beginning so that I've not highlighted anything. I've just kind of set up my data. So I'm going to move my image over here for a moment, and then I'm going to say insert chart, and it's going to bring up a blank chart, which is entirely too big for what I've got. So let me make this reasonable size so you can see all the work that I'm doing. And it says no data, so there's nothing here, but it does come up with all sorts of options that I can change over there. The type of graph that I am interested in is an XY scatter, and most of the time in physics classes, XY scatters are where it's at, where it graphs points, and you can define the X values and the Y values. You have to be careful. If you define them both as what's called a series, then it makes up its own X values and it doesn't kind of do X versus Y, which is what I'm looking for here. I want X and Y. So I'm going to do an XY scatter. And again, there's still no data, so I have to choose what I want and where I want it. Along the X-axis, I want my velocity in this case. And so I'm going to come down here to where it says X-axis, and I'm going to click where it says Add X-axis. It pulls up a little thing that says Select Data Range. And so I can come over here, and I can actually click all the way through from the label and all the way down. And if I say OK, it doesn't do anything. And you're like, wait, is it broken? No, in fact, what's going on is it's waiting for more data to be able to put in there. So now I have to come over and add series. Series is the first set of data. It's the Y values as we go. So I'm going to click on Add Series, and it comes up here with a little box. I want to go ahead and put in this little thing that looks almost like a window or a little set of cells there. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to come back and it says Select Data Range. So I'm going to select the force, clicking and holding and bringing it all the way down, and then say OK. You'll notice that when I did so, it didn't include my labels up here, right? It didn't put it in. Now, if I'd selected from 0 to 25, this graph would look exactly the same, but it didn't do so. I have some choices here. It says use row 6 as headers. I don't know why row 6. Switch rows and columns. I don't really want to do that either. So let's go ahead and add in the rest of our chart to make sure that it's doing what we want. So I'm going to go to Customize, Charts, and Access Titles. Right now it says Chart Title. So I'm going to title this, and I'm going to call it Force versus Velocity. Okay. Or being more specific, I could title it whatever the thing is. So I could think about this in centripetal force. E-R-I-P-E-P-A-L, centripetal force versus velocity. All right, so I've got a title. It's big and bold. I want to go ahead and change to my axis label. So my horizontal axis label down here. This horizontal one was velocity, E-L-O-C-I-T, velocity, and I'm going to put it in meters per second. I'm going to select the vertical, and I'm going to put in force in newtons. So now I've put in all my necessary labels. Maybe we make this a little bit bigger. So let's talk about how to put in a trend line at this point. If you come down under the Customize menu, so I'm going to close up Chart and Axis Titles, to where it says Series. This, again, is now allowing us to edit that series. And I could change the size of the dots if I want to, or I can change the color of the dots, how much they're filled in terms of opacity, all sorts of things. I can even change it from dots to other things. But I'm going to come down a little bit further to the word Trend Line. I'm going to click on Trend Line, and it immediately drops in a linear kind of function here. And you'll notice that on my linear function, it's not really going through all of my dots tremendously well. It has some of the dots below and some of the dots above. So I might make some other choices here about what might fit. If I hit exponential, that's another choice that I've got for trend line. Better, still not right on. Polynomial. Now polynomials can fit almost anything, but in some cases they're useful. Polynomials essentially means x squared or x cubed or x to the fourth. I'm going to go ahead and hit polynomial here. And what you'll notice, based on the numbers that I chose, that this fits a squared graph. So this is an x squared graph, and so it fits all of my dots perfectly. Your goal here is to go ahead and find the one that seems to fit your dots most of the time. Moving average is, or excuse me, power series is also right on, and then moving average is close. So I'm going to go back up here to polynomial for the moment, and then come down below, and there's this word label. And if I click underneath that, it's going to ask, what label do I want for my trend line? And I want to use the equation. I want to show what that equation is, so I've got something to work with. And you'll notice that it comes up with this pretty wild equation, but this is a quadratic equation, right? It's got an x squared and then an x and then another thing that doesn't have an x in it at all. So it's a polynomial that goes up to the second order. Because I just used this 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, it's 1 times x squared. So this essentially is y equals x squared for this particular graph. If I was to change my type of best fit line to power series, for instance, it's still coming up y equals x squared. So that's why those two had the same fit either way around. Others did not have as good a fit. So exponential is e to the power of x, depending on what it is. So anyway, that doesn't matter to us right now. So this is pretty good. I've got a polynomial fit. It all works in there. I've got my 2 axis labels. I've got my title. I'm going to close this up. And now if I want to use this graph somewhere, I can easily just cut and paste the graph into what I need. So here, or copy and paste it. So I can copy it and then put it right where I want it. So hopefully that was helpful. Back